Given the diversity of cognitive problems, cognitive domains such as executive functions, attention and memory emerge most frequently at risk. Specificity of cognitive impairment across disorders, the relationship of these deficits with the underlying psychopathology and neuroanatomy of these disorders, and the impact of the impairments on treatment implications needs to be explored. Primary intervention with these dysfunctions provide considerable insight and would suggest ways of effective dealing with these dysfunctions. 3. Cognition. The ability to process information and draw inferences lies unique to the human species. This specific ability in broad sense is called cognition and includes the key components such as attention, memory, thinking, learning, perception, motivation and language. Throughout life it can be broadly described as an interaction between knowledge-driven processes and sensory processes, and between controlled processes and automatic processes. Among the specific aspects that may be used to gauge the functioning of cognition may include problem solving, abstract thinking, reasoning and judgment, use and manipulation of symbols, perception, acquisition of skills, etc. Deficits in such area may lead to problems in thinking critically, planning and organizing, paying attention and processing the information, recalling and working upon the information simultaneously, initiating speech and responding to the information spontaneously. Certain questions need to be answered in context of psychiatric disorders and cognitive impairment. 1. What is the profile of cognitive impairment in psychiatric disorders? 2. How does cognitive impairment relate to other genetic or sociocultural factors? 3. Do these cognitive deficits vary over a period of time? 4. How does cognitive impairment impact the prognosis of the disorder? Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 3.1 Key cognitive domains. Cognitive impairments share a robust relationship with the nature and magnitude of the pathology. Therefore, it becomes extremely important to understand key cognitive domains in brief. 3.1.1 Working memory. It deals with holding information in mind and simultaneously working or manipulating the information. It involves higher mental activities such as being able to relate one idea to another, performing mental maths, relating previous information with new learned information and sequencing the information. It entails the capacity to hold a particular set of information, online, for a brief span and later either use the information or manipulate it to draw conclusions for cognitive or behavioral tasks. Working memory is believed to be extremely vital in order to have a multidimensional view of thought or action, critical thinking, execute action plans and to enhance creativity. 3.1.2 Executive functions. Recent attempts have defined executive functions as those indulged in complex cognitions, such as concept formation, solving novel question, assimilation, adaptation, developing strategic approach or sequencing complex actions. In another modern review, executive function are identified as a product of the coordinated operation of various processes to accomplish a particular goal in a flexible manner. These functions are also viewed as playing a critical role in construction of mature cognitions. The ability of the individual to hold and manipulate information in mind, to be able to act on alternatives rather than pure impulses, to exercise self-monitoring and to be able to flexibly shift to the changing cognitive tasks fall into the domain of adequate executive functioning. In other words, working memory, inhibition, task switching emerge as major components of frontal lobe functions, a term used synonymous to executive functions. 3.1.3 Attention. With several sensations from varied sense organs, the ability to attend to few poses a challenge. The ability of an individual to be able to select aspect for its inclusion at the forefront and rest at the background refers to the process of attention. It is the focal point of awareness of certain attributes in the perceptual field. The basic idea of attention is to be able to filter out irrelevant information and to select useful information at the epicenter of consciousness. In cognitive psychology, the ability of the individual to parallelly focus on simultaneous information like two different messages and then to discern meaning of different information into each ear is his ability of divided attention. In such a case, the individual is many times able to recall information of one ear and also have memory of some information in the other ear. 3.1.4 Thinking and reasoning. The process of cognitive rearrangement and manipulation of events facilitating adaptation to the environment is conceived as thinking. It is perceived to be a constructive process of creating new. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Schemas with active assimilation and accommodation process. Thinking involves interaction of various other mental activities, such as reasoning, problem solving, judgment, abstraction, deduction, etc. Pedestal to thinking is the interface between concepts and ability of reasoning. Concept refers to mental categories representing objects, ideas, abstractions, organisms, etc. The organization of knowledge in hierarchy and system is provided by concepts which are clearly manifested in behavior than explicitly seen. Reasoning, on the other hand, emerges from logical thinking and inference to seek solution to a problem. Rationalizing events based on stored information, experiences, knowledge, rules encompass goal-directed thinking. Reasoning is broadly of two types, deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning allows drawing of inferences from set of assertions, whereas inductive reasoning deals with development of general assumption based on small evidences. Both types of reasoning are goal-directed and are aimed at problem solving. 4. Cognitive causes and symptomatology in various disorders. One of the major etiological factors of various psychiatric disorders lies in the biases and deficits of information processing ability. As a result, many times deficits in cognitive symptoms such as poor attention, memory, perception, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility may surface. Some of the common disorders with focus on their cognitive roots and symptomatology are discussed below. 4.1 Schizophrenia. One of the most debilitating psychotic disorders with not a very healthy prognosis is schizophrenia. It is marked by serious impairments in thought process, emotions and behavior. Broadly, there are 4 types of schizophrenia: catatonia, herbephrenic, paranoid and mixed type. Each of the types in symptomatology includes both positive and negative symptoms. Positive symptoms may include a complete fragmentation of the thought process and perception leading to hallucinations or delusions. On the other hand, the negative symptoms may involve flat affect, psychomotor retardation, social withdrawal, etc. Schizophrenic patients are generally unable to make sense of the sensory information, and in their acute phase they lose their ability to take care of their personal needs and grooming. The etiology of schizophrenia can be viewed from biopsychosocial perspective, depicting interplay of genetic vulnerabilities with psychological stressors and sociocultural pressures. However, restricting our view only to psychological causes in order to understand the cognitive roots, it can be gained that following factors can potentially lead to schizophrenia: a childhood abuse or trauma, family dysfunction such as separation in families, pathological family, c, loss of loved one, bereavement, stressful life events, d, double meaning in communication, hostility and lack of control in relationships, e, lack of self-esteem, poor identity formation. These factors may operate in isolation or in conjunction with the genetic anomalies or sociological stressors. The understanding of various psychological factors in causation of schizophrenia perhaps leads to the occurrence of certain cognitive deficits. Such fundamental deficits in schizophrenia become core feature and may precipitate functional impairments in the individual. The deficits may appear to be stable over time and in certain cases may also persist even after remission. The cognitive lack may appear in broad areas such as working memory, executive functions, attention and information processing, memory, etc. In case of working memory, limited capacity to hold an. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Information and simultaneously be able to work upon the material is depicted in the patient. It could be attributed to the hypofunction of the prefrontal cortex. It may also result in formal thought disorder and lead to total derailment and dissociation of thoughts. Weakening of the long-term memory in terms of free and sequential recall may also be exhibited. In relation to executive functions, poor performance on related assessment revealed deficits in the area of inhibitory control and cognitive flexibility. Impulsivity, poor planning, organization, execution have also been clearly viewed in such patients. Intellectual impairment and poor visual motor coordination also emerges as a core feature of the unique pathology. Also, few negative symptoms such as flattening of affect, social withdrawal have also been associated with poor functioning of the executive process. Deficits in attention in schizophrenics have also been attributed to the predisposition from parents and may also persist as a factor even post-remission. Verbal, episodic and visual memory also seems to be largely affected in schizophrenia. Most of the cognitive deficits vary depending on the nature of symptomatology. In some cases the deficits may relate to more disorganized with negative symptoms, whereas in some cases positive symptoms may surface more. However, no pathognomonic neuropsychological profile seems to appear in schizophrenia, which may be attributed to the etiological heterogeneity of the disorder. In terms of treatment, developments in psychopharmacological and neuropsychological field may suggest better methods to deal with cognitive and social functions. 4.2 Mood disorders. Mood disorders is also called affective disorders characteristically involve oscillation of mood and cycles of depression and mania. Fluctuations in mood may be more intense and pervasive than normal mood swings. The transition from high to low mood in some cases may be completely dramatic, while in other situations it may be gradual and slow, alternating with periods of normal mood in between as well. The symptoms of depression or mania both can be severe and lead to cognitive impairment. Mania may exhibit feeling of euphoria, increased psychomotor activity, flight of ideas, grandiosity, hallucinations, impulsivity and sociability, etc. On the other hand, depressive episode involves feeling of pervasive sadness, hopelessness, helplessness, social withdrawal, slow thinking, poor memory, pessimistic ideas, delusions, poor psychomotor activity, etc. The causes of the disorder can be attributed to the stressful life events, quality of family relationships, emotional expressiveness among the family members, specific attitude sets such as perfectionism, self-criticality, traumatic events such as loss of loved one, loss of a job, substance abuse and dependence, etc. may trigger a hypomanic episode followed by depressive phase. The relationship between mood and cognition is dynamic as a result of state and trait-dependent components. The trait-dependent features may provide an insight into the genetic vulnerabilities, neurological deficits and brain anomalies. Neurocognitive deficits are very strongly present in mood disorders and are well reflected in performance tests for attention, executive functions and memory. In acute phase of mania, the patients may exhibit short attention span and high distractibility. Lack of planning, organization and impulsivity in execution is clearly seen. Increase in multitasking capacity, lack of goal-directedness, haphazardness in judgment and decision-making surface as well in behavior. On the other hand, in case of depressive episode, impairment in working memory and sustained attention are seen. Deficits in the area of verbal memory, visual motor skills, visuospatial abilities and abstract reasoning are viewed. However, in case of comparison among the two phases, the cognitive intactness seems to be better in. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Depression than mania. Also high correlation of nature and strength of deficits with duration of illness is seen. 4.3 Depression. One of the most common psychiatric disorder is depression, characterized by feeling of sadness, helplessness, hopelessness, guilt, disturbance in sleep pattern, lack of appetite, loss of libido, social withdrawal, etc. Recurrent and untreated depression may severely hamper the daily life functioning and in acute cases may also lead to suicide. Delusion of nihilism, where a person may think that the world is coming to an end, no brain in the skull, or no blood in the heart, may also emerge in severe cases. Depression seems to be more common in females than males, and recent research suggests increasing prevalence of childhood depression as well. Mild depression can be treated through professional psychotherapy, whereas moderate to severe depression would require medical intervention with intensive psychotherapy. The attempts to understand the causes for depression besides the genetic factors, cognitive model have gained prominence and acceptance as well. According to the cognitive theory, the cognition or one's thought and beliefs potentially determine the emotions and behavior. Aaron Beck 1967 propounded the cognitive model of depression and stated that depressive symptoms emerge as a result of people's attribution of events strongly influenced with maladaptive beliefs and expectancies. Beck 1967 found evidence that deviation from logical and realistic thinking was found at every level of depression, from mild neurotic to severe psychotic. Also, certain themes were found to be central to the depressed patient, clinically distinguishing him from non-depressed, such as low self-esteem, negative perception and cognitive exaggeration of problems, self-criticism, suicidal ideations and feeling of helplessness. This model asserts three specific ideas: a cognitive triad, negative view of self, world and future; B, cognitive schemas, pattern of maladaptive thoughts and beliefs, Beck et al. 1979, and C, cognitive errors, faulty thinking accompanied by negative and unrealistic representation of reality. Thus, cognitive theory postulates a linear relationship between thought, emotion and behavior. It assumes that an individual's thinking pattern is composed of maladaptive beliefs, schemas, attitude determine his emotion and behavioral reaction in a situation. This chronic negative belief pattern later becomes a mode or a template of thinking, giving rise to negative emotions and subsequent maladaptive behavior. Clark and Beck 1999 stated that then this mode of depression includes the cognitive schemas, affective schemas, physiological schemas, motivational schemas and behavioral schemas. Since according to Beck 1989, the behavioral consequences of psychopathology will depend on the content of cognitive structuring, therefore a change in the emotion of sadness would initiate with the correction of the dysfunctional thought process. Psychology paper number 1. Cognitive science. Psychology paper number 1. Psychology paper number 1. Cognitive science. Psychology paper number 1. Cognitive science. Fig 1. Depicting cognitive explanation of depression. In view of cognitive deficits, various studies have suggested presence of neuropsychological deficits in the area of verbal memory, visual memory and executive functions. Impaired concentration, slowness in thinking, repetitive intrusive thoughts, and indecisiveness emerge as major information processing deficits. Increased reaction time, poor recall, impairments in nonverbal memory, tangentiality, anhedonia emerge as significant deficits in such patients. However, in an attempt to compare, a large body of evidence suggests presence of cognitive deficits in schizophrenia and mood disorders, though the nature of such impairments may vary qualitatively. Schizophrenia, being a psychotic disorder, exhibits intense deficits to an extent that there is a debate for inclusion of these deficits as a core diagnostic indicator in DSM-V. and Goldberg, 2000. Despite the heterogeneity, there are certain cognitive deficits which are communal to SC and mood disorders, such as a decrease in working memory, attention, psychomotor speed, task planning, visual spatial abilities, etc. Shretlin, 2007. 4.4 Obsessive compulsive disorder. One of the most debilitating anxiety disorders, OCD, is a potentially disabling condition that can persist throughout an individual's life. The patient tends to be trapped in a pattern of repetitive thoughts and behaviors that may appear senseless and distressing to others but are extremely difficult to overcome. Obsessions can be defined as unwanted ideas, images or impulses that repeatedly intrude in the conscious awareness of the individual. It is completely recognized as irrational and absurd, yet the patient is unable to resist, which leads to marked distress. Persistent fears emerge at the epicenter, such as harm to self or loved one, fear of contamination or fear of failure. The individual is repeatedly haunted by disturbing intrusive thoughts, such as, my hands may be contaminated, I must wash them, I may not have locked the door, or, I am going to injure my child. Such thoughts are extremely intrusive, distressing, and produce a high degree of anxiety. In response to reduce the anxiety from the obsessions, people tend to follow repetitive behaviors called compulsions. Compulsions are of 4 types, such as cleaning, checking, arranging and counting. Excessive mental work such as repeating phrases, list making, or checking or following regimented rituals may be used to overcome some relief from anxiety, but which is only temporary. A view of etiological theories of OCD suggests psychological, biological and neuropsychological factors. The cognitive model of OCD proposes dysfunctional beliefs and maladaptive expectancies to be the major cause of anxiety. Obsessive Compulsive Cognitions Working Group OCCWG, 2005, has outlined 6 major belief domains that are thought to play a significant role in development of obsessions: A. Inflated personal responsibility; B. Overestimation of threat; C. Beliefs about importance of controlling one's thought; D. Overimportance of thought; E. Intolerance of uncertainty; F. Perfectionism. A high degree of correlation was viewed between the 6 domains, and factor analysis revealed 3 major domains to underlie OCD: A. Overestimation of threat; B. Perfectionism; and C. Control of thoughts. Steckity et al. 2003, Taylor, Kyrgios, Thordarson, Steckity, and Frost, 2002. Cognitive model of OCD has implicated the role of self-perception and beliefs about the world to be dominant factors in causation of OCD. 2 major cognitive biases that lead to catastrophic misinterpretations of intrusive thoughts have also been outlined. Rachman, 1998. First bias involves the belief that thinking about an unpleasant situation makes it more approximate to occurrence, and the second bias, or the moral bias, says that Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Holding an immoral thought is equivalent to doing an immoral action. For example, having a sexual fantasy beyond the partner may create a moral conflict, and keeping it hidden or suppressed inside may lead to heightened anxiety. The individual might start considering himself as immoral and may deeply fear the execution of the intrusive thought. This phenomenon of drawing a sequential relationship between thought and action is also called thought-action fusion, or TAF. Shafran, Thordarson, and Rachman, 1996, Rachman, 1998. See also This phenomenon of drawing a sequential relationship between thought and action is also called thought-action fusion or TAF. Shafran, Thordarson, and Rachman, 1996, Rachman, 1998. See also Wells, 1997. Fig 2. Depicting the origin and nature of OCD thoughts. In view of cognitive deficits, neuropsychological impairments have closely suggested biological underpinnings of the illness. Depreciation of social skills, reduced capacity for independent living, and vocational failure may be considered to be the result of neurocognitive deficits. In case of cognitive deficits, compromises in executive functions are common with patients of OCD. Selective attention to the negative stimuli and total disregard irrelevant stimuli occurs as major deficit with the attention process. Reduced visual spatial and visuoconstruction abilities may appear as major deficit, suggesting strong neuropsychological underpinnings as well. Non-verbal memory, visual reproduction, delayed reproduction of figures, encoding and retrieval are impaired, whereas storage seems to be intact. Implicit memory and procedural learning, especially in case of dual task, also seems to be seriously affected. Reduction in sustained attention, increased errors, and elevated reaction time also emerge as significant deficits. However, OCD patients demonstrate normal general intelligence and language abilities. The degree of impairments was also found to be positively correlated within the severity of illness. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.5 Somatoform disorder. Somatoform disorders are characterized by repeated presentation of physical complaints without any adequate physical basis to explain it. Such complaints appear to be truly medical in origin but cannot be explained in terms of physical disease, result of any substance abuse or any other psychiatric disorder. The patient seems to show a persistent request for investigations and treatment in spite of repeated assurances by the doctors. Consequently, at times doctor shopping also emerges as a concurrent behavior of the individual. In order to meet the criteria for somatoform disorders, the physical symptoms should be of disabling intensity where the individual may not have any control over it and may interfere with the person's vocation, relationships. Somatoform disorder is generally found to be more common in females, whereas alcoholism and psychopathy are more prevalent in males. This pathology is many times considered to be idiom of stresses. One of the major causes of somatization disorder is stress and breakdown of coping strategies. Family stress, childhood abuse, or sexual trauma is also believed to be a major precursor of the pathology. Imitation of the behavior or wrong modeling can also be a potential cause of the disorder. In case if the patient's significant other is able to fetch out strong secondary gains from somatizing, imitation of the pathological behavior is an easy way for the patient. Cultural influences such as black magic or specific body sensations are also seen an imperative factor in triggering of the disorder. With increase in education and exposure, cultural stressors have also seemed to reduce. In the context of cognitive deficits, poor concentration, decreased memory for recent events, and poor word completion is seen. Spatial abilities, slow processing speed, impaired working memory, poor learning, set shifting, planning, and poor inhibitory control may surface as major cognitive symptoms. About 70%-85% patients exhibit cognitive impairments and strongly contribute to the individual's social and occupational dysfunctions. The patients have also demonstrated poor performance on tests of executive functions and memory such as Wisconsin's card sorting test, spatial working memory test, and continuous performance test. In totality, poor psychosocial functioning is well exhibited by such patients. Intervention targeting the stress and other factors such as supportive psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, relation therapy may prove effective. 4.6 Eating disorder. Eating disorders exhibit extreme disturbances in eating behavior. It distinguishes itself from the normal eating disturbances in terms of its intensity and manifestation. There are 3 types of eating disorders: 1. Anorexia nervosa (AN), 2. Bulimia nervosa (BN), and 3. Eating disorder not otherwise specified (EDNOS), and is characterized with complete denial of food accompanied with acute body image disturbance. At the other end of the continuum lies BN, classified with repeated bouts of overeating with a sense of low self-esteem. On the other hand, EDNOS category lies at the subthreshold level and includes patients that do not completely meet either the criteria for anorexia or bulimia. The disorder was initially considered to be a characteristic of West, but the recent research indicates increased prevalence even in the other countries. It is thrice as common in females as males and has an increasing prevalence amongst the teenage group. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. The occurrence of eating disorders can be attributed to a set of biological, psychological, and sociological factors. Considering only the cognitive factors, the cognitive theory behind eating disorders reveals that individual tends to excessively define and evaluate own self in terms of weight and shape. As a result, the cognitive structures unite the view of self with body and shape, which further exerts an automatic influence on the processing of the food-related stimulus. People with eating disorders tend to exhibit distortions in the processing of food-related information such as attentional and memory biases while dealing with food stimuli. There is a constant mental struggle where the individual deals with dichotomous, all or one thinking and fails to appraise any relevant evidence. Therefore, for an eating disorder patient, the world is either beautiful or ugly, thin or fat, good or bad without any intermediating levels. This type of thinking drags the individual away from the reality and constructs a world with negative view of oneself, specifically in terms of weight and shape. With such self-pressures, the pursuit for thinness emerges at the nucleus and encourage the individual to diet excessively. This strict dieting in turn leads to psychological deprivation and physical hunger. When encountered with life stressors, it may trigger a binge. This cycle of strict dieting and then suddenly to repeated bouts of uncontrolled overeating accompanied with intense fear of weight gain emerges as a strong cognitive and behavioral challenge. Iber et al. In view of cognitive deficits, anorexia is associated with higher level of metacognitive capacities accompanied with a lack of positive self-beliefs. In case of bulimia, poor self-esteem is accompanied with biased judgment and information capacity. In regard with social cognition, such patients exhibit increased hostile intent accompanied with pessimistic emotions, avoidant and intracognitive strategies. Characteristic to the pathology is that attention is biased in favor of selectively processing information related to body, weight, and shape. Also, reflection of memory bias where recall of eating-related events is much easier and occurs without much conscious efforts by the individual. However, more evidence is available for implicit than explicit memory bias. Thin ideal internalization occurring as a result of exposure to ideal images portrayed by media leading to body image bias is an important predictor in ED. Also, thought shape fusion, where the individual may just think of eating and feel an increase in the body shape, also emerges as a vital indicator in such pathology. In addition, negative life events, personality factors such as narcissistic traits, internal locus of control, and lack of self-serving bias strongly determine eating behavior. Considering the heterogeneity in cognitive etiology of eating disorder, therapy targeting the cognitive factors is hypothesized to be most effective treatment approach. 4.7 Borderline personality disorder. Personality can be viewed as deeply ingrained pattern of behavior that includes modes of perception, relating to others, thinking about oneself and the environment. Personality disorders emerge when such personality attributes turn abnormal, maladaptive, and cause significant social or occupational impairment accompanied with marked distress. Borderline personality disorder is characterized with persistent disturbance of identity of self for X, who am I, unstable. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Interpersonal relationship patterns, unstable emotional responses with rapid shifts, chronic feeling of boredom and emptiness, deliberate self-harm and impulsivity. Psychological causes seem to be extremely important in etiology and maintenance of borderline personality disorder. Problems with cognitive and emotional regulation is believed to be at the epicenter. History of unstable relationships and emotional trauma are the key factors. Development of poor self-concept and insidious fears such as sexual fantasy at times tend to interfere with the normal functioning. Cognitive biases such as self-fulfilling prophecy and anchoring also tend to influence the judgment and the perception of the self as well as the world. Incompetent self-feelings lead to lowness of mood, strange emptiness, and liability of mood. Impulsivity in planning, organization, and execution also emerge to be significant causes. Comorbidity of borderline personality disorder with various other pathologies is also observed, such as depression, episodes of schizophrenia, substance abuse, and eating disorders, along with self-harm, suicidal behaviors, and completed suicides. In view of cognitive deficits, recent research has revealed poor decision-making skills and problem-solving. Berges 1991 demonstrated a link between attention and memory impairment and self-injury. O'Leary et al. 1991 depicted facilitation of memory with cues in spite of impairment in verbal memory skills. Thus, use of cueing strategies in treatment of such patients may prove helpful. Paris et al. 1999 found significant impairment on neuropsychological tests of frontal lobe and executive functions in children with such pathology, and also showed inconsistent levels of attention, poor orientation to task, and slower reaction on other assessments of executive functions. Another significant finding in such patients was that suicidal ideations and attempts were related to cognitive functioning than the most obviously thought level of depression. 4.8 Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD. This syndrome was first described by Heinrich Hoff, 1854. Since then it has been known with variety of names such as minimal brain dysfunction, MBD, hyperkinetic syndrome, and Strauss syndrome. ADHD is a developmental disorder characterized by poor attention span with distractibility, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Such children fail to finish things started, shift from one uncompleted activity to another, get easily distracted by external stimuli, have difficulty sitting at one place, interfere in other people's activity, absence of thinking before acting, problem in waiting for turn to come, and are extremely fidgety. They are constantly moving, running, climbing, squirming, but often have trouble with gross and fine motor skills and, as a result, may appear to be physically clumsy and awkward. In social settings, they are sometimes shunned and humiliated due to their impulsive and hyperactive behavior. Since ADHD is a developmental disorder, biological factors seem to play a stronger role than pure psychological causes. Genetic predisposition and vulnerability is recognized as a vital factor. Also, deficit of dopamine is believed to be involved in ADHD. Neuroimaging studies have suggested thinner brain tissue in the areas of brain associated with attention. However, these differences may subside with growth. Brain injury before or after birth has also been found to affect ADHD symptoms. Components of nutrition and food are also found to be a significant factor in ADHD. Food additives and sugar are believed to be important reasons for ADHD, though it lacks empirical support. Lack of omega-3 fatty acids and use of fish oil have been. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Found to be linked to ADHD. Maternal smoking during pregnancy and hypoxia may trigger ADHD symptoms. Cognitive deficits in children with ADHD primarily relate to areas of attention and memory. Weak evidence for deficits in the areas of visual spatial and visuomotor functioning are found in ADHD. Various deficits in the areas of cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control, working memory, planning, organization, self-monitoring have been clearly linked to ADHD. Further research using cognitive tasks assessing executive functions in combination with functional imaging techniques will provide insights into the etiology of the disorder. 2. Introduction. Acknowledging the robust role of cognition in causation of various disorders in previous module, the focus now shifts onto possible cognitive interventions. Thus, the focus of this module will be on understanding the intervention modality of various therapies based on the cognitive premise. Cognitive theories focus on cognition or the thinking process. It stems from cognitive psychology with its emphasis on effects of thoughts on emotions and behavior. It emerged in opposition to rigorous methodology of behaviorism, which completely denied the mental cause of behavior and purely emphasized on stimulus-response relationship. This paradigm shift marked the cognitive revolution, happening in 1970s. Emphasizing more on the role of active conscious processes in thinking made psychotherapy was made more effective to both therapists as well as patients. A boost to this second wave revolution was also purely reflected in the development of cognitive sciences. Two major factors that played a critical role were increasing the understanding of attribution theory in social psychology and emergence of computer science and computer programming. Computer working was viewed as the best analogy to express the functioning of human brain and cognition. These two developments propelled and gave scientific legitimacy to the cognitive revolution. It also widened the horizons for behavioral therapists to now view the problem in light of the conscious mental processing than purely inferring from just the observable behavior. This suggested the integration of cognitive and behavioral techniques, giving us the first true cognitive behavioral therapy. The third wave to the cognitive revolution emerged recently in 2006 with more emphasis on the empirical research and findings. The focus from the content of thought only had now shifted to the processes of thought, or in other words, not merely what we think but rather how we think. The role of acceptance and mindfulness have been the new dimensions to traditional cognitive therapy. Some of the recent third-wave therapies developed are acceptance and commitment therapy (ACT), mindfulness-based cognitive therapy (MBCT), dialectic behavior therapy (DBT), functional analytic psychotherapy (FAP), etc. In the present module, first wave cognitive behavioral therapy, second wave rational emotive therapy, transactional analysis, and third wave acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy would be discussed in brief. 3. Cognitive premise. Cognitive theorists believe that thoughts influence feelings and behavior. If a person changes his way of thinking, feeling and behavior will be modified consequently. In a series of experimental studies on depressed patients, Beck 1967 realized that depression was not a psychology paper number 1, cognitive science byproduct of unconscious drives and forces, but rather persistent negative beliefs and biased information processing. This marked the reformulation of the existing psychodynamic perspective to the role of cognition, which had largely been overlooked by the therapists. The introduction to the concept of schemas and its debilitating role in interpretation of events was clearly explicated. The idea of cognitive truth, negative belief about oneself, world and future, was at the epicenter in exploring the cognitive theory behind depression. The focus on tilts in information processing, cluster of beliefs, maladaptive schemas were at the core of cognitive theory. In working with the patients, the aspect of teaching the patients to test the accuracy of their own beliefs and to be insightful about the biasing effect of schema processing accounted as major strategies. Therefore, correcting the maladaptive beliefs, the individual's perception of events and consequent emotions also deliberated a change. The premise is viewed to focus on the present, behavior and thought processes than past experiences and unconscious. Two themes common to the cognitive theory were 1. Conviction that cognitive processes influence emotions and behavior, 2. Use of cognitive and behavioral change technique in a pragmatic manner. Beck's commitment to the scientific legitimacy to accept empirical testing of the postulates laid the foundation for shaping the approach and successful worldwide recognition. 4. Cognitive-oriented therapies. 4.1 Cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, belonging to the second wave, aims to address dysfunctional cognition and resultant emotion and behavior. It presupposes that maladaptive thinking determines felt emotion and executed behavior. The therapy developed with a combination of using behavioral techniques to correct cognitive distortions. The intervention is believed to be completely problem-focused and action-oriented. CBT is considered to be, here and now, symptom-oriented approach with active and directive role of the therapist in dealing with the presenting symptoms. The therapist aims to target cognitive distortions or errors in thinking and help them adopt more realistic and effective view of life. It aims to challenge the dysfunctional beliefs and replace it with more structured and adaptive cognitions. It also poses to eliminate judgment tilts called cognitive biases such as overgeneralization, anchoring, catastrophizing, magnifying negatives and minimizing positives. CBT proposes 6 steps of functioning such as a. Psychological assessment, B. Reconceptualization, C. Skill acquisition, D. Skill consolidation, E. Generalization and maintenance, F. Follow-up plan. In the assessment phase, the therapist begins with psychological evaluation, case history taking and mental status examination, gauging insight into the problem of the client. The second phase involves the major part of the therapy. It includes identification and restructuring of the cognitive dysfunctions. The third phase involves teaching and acquisition of adaptive cognitive skills. In the next phase, crystallization of the acquired skills comes at the focus. Further, careful application of the skill and proper follow-up is taught to the patients. CBT involves varied intervention strategies such as self-instructions, biofeedback, relaxation, goal setting, etc. It can be used both in individual and group settings with focus on brief, goal-directed and technique-specific approach. CBT in adolescents has been found to be quite effective in treatment of body dysmorphic disorder, attention deficit problems, obesity, anxiety disorder, tic disorder, trichotillomania and other repetitive behavior. In case of adults, CBT has been found to be quite effective in treatment of psychology paper number 1, cognitive science. Various pathological conditions such as mood disturbances, eating disorders, anxiety, substance abuse, personality aberrations, stress, etc. The efficacy of CBT program has been proven by various evidence-based treatment in comparison to other conventional approaches such as psychodynamic or behavioral approach. Modern form of CBT includes varied specific techniques such as stress inoculation training, relation training, exposure therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment-based therapy, etc. Computerized cognitive behavioral therapy has been a recent trend proving effective in treatment of depression and anxiety. The virtual mode has been found to be equally successful as face-to-face CBT, especially in anxiety, depression and insomnia. Fig 1. Depicting the interrelationship of thought. Fig 1. Depicting the interrelationship of thoughts, emotions and behavior. The major techniques used in CBT are as follows. 1. Psychoeducation. In this phase the clients were educated and made aware of the nature of the problem in order to develop the insight of the subject over the issues. 2. Cognitive restructuring. With this technique the client was encouraged and helped to adopt more rational or constructive ways of thinking about their problems. 3. Self-help. The therapist with this technique encouraged the personality of the client to mediate between needs and reality. Client is encouraged to be satisfied with one's own attributes and qualities while remaining aware of one's limitations also. Thoughts. How we think affects how we feel. Behavior. What we do affects what we think and feel. Emotions. How we feel impacts thinking and what we do. Psychology paper number 1, cognitive science. 4. Diary writing. The client with this activity is encouraged to report his daily activities in a diary, helping him to release the thoughts and also to become aware of the unproductive thought processes. 5. Relaxation and distraction. With this technique, the client was made to relax and also to distract from the problems and issues. 6. Response delay and prevention. The client was encouraged to delay the dysfunctional response and also later to prevent it. 7. ABC paradigm. With this technique, the activating event leading to the thought processes and consequences is chartered, and the client was encouraged to see his daily activities in this paradigm only. Fig 2. Depicting ABC paradigm is used in CBT. Fig 2. Depicting ABC paradigm is used in CBT. 8. Negative cognitive triad. The use of this technique was to disrupt the negative thoughts about the self, about the world, and one's future. 9. Hypothesis testing. With this method, the client was asked to test his dysfunctional thoughts as hypothesis, which is subject to criticism by rational argument and refutation by empirical evidence, and thereby correct the unproductive thought process. The critical evaluation of CBT reveals that it depicts itself as a shorter approach, being clearly instructive and structured. It is found to be cross-cultural in approach, generating future research. However, on the other hand, CBT is also found to be an approach specific to intellectual patients. It has very limited efficacy with schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. No matter CBT being clear in the instructions and methodology, its execution with a trained therapist is always a prerequisite. Although relapse with CBT is less in comparison to other approaches, yet prevention of relapse with comorbid disorders is still a challenge. Nevertheless, CBT has been found to be quite efficacious in comparison to other conventional and unconventional treatment modalities. 4.2 Rational Emotive Therapy. RET was introduced by Albert Ellis in 1960s. Having his orientation in psychoanalytic therapy like Beck and dissatisfaction emerging from lack of usage of scientific principles urged him towards paradigmatic shift. Based on the cognitive premise, the therapy was first introduced as rational therapy (RT), then its appellation is rational emotive therapy (RET), and current appellation is rational emotive behavior therapy (REBT). In spite of various revisions, RET. Activating event. Behavior consequences. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Rested upon the assumption that people are inherently rational and irrational, logical and illogical. This rationality, self-help. Social help, constructive attitude, and irrationality, self-defeating, social defeating and destructive attitude prevails as innate tendencies in various conflicting situations. According to Ellis, this duality is biologically inherited and is perpetuated unless substituted by another form of learning. This irrational thinking was assumed to be the source of disturbing thoughts and harsh feelings. Ellis 1962 listed 11 common irrational beliefs found to be correlated with various kinds of emotional disturbances. 1. It is absolutely essential to be loved or approved of by every significant person in one's life. 2. To be worthwhile, a person must be competent, adequate, and achieving in everything attempted. 3. Some people are wicked, bad, and villainous and therefore should be blamed or punished. 4. Unhappiness is the result of outside events and therefore the person has no control over such despair. 5. It is terrible and a catastrophe whenever events do not occur as one hopes. 6. Something potentially dangerous or harmful should be a cause for great concern and should always be kept in mind. 7. A person must depend on others and must have someone stronger on whom to rely. 8. Running away from difficulties and responsibilities is easier than facing me. 9. A person should get upset over the problems and difficulties of others. 10. The past determines one's present behavior and thus it cannot be changed. 11. There is always a right answer to every problem and a failure to find this answer is a catastrophe. Ellis 1973 posited that humans by nature are vulnerable, suggestible, and thus easily prone to get disturbed. At the same time, people also have the means within themselves to deal with such difficult emotions. In such cases, the personal conscious awareness including self-talk was considered to be important with a total rejection to the unconscious mind. The goal of the therapy primarily focused on the belief to make their lives more productive, rational, and to give up self-defeating behavior. It aims at correcting fallacies, eliminating disturbing emotions, and readopting a rational way of thinking. Emotional control in terms of regulating the expression of negative emotions by catastrophizing less and using puns, humor in therapy. The emotional anatomy in terms of relationship between thoughts, feelings, and action is taught to the client. The ABC of RET, which explains A as activating experience, B as the person's thought about the experience, and C as the emotional reaction to B is deeply explicated to the client. Fig 3. ABC model of RET. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Teaching and disputing emerge as primary techniques of RET. Disputation can be cognitive, imaginable, and behavioral. Cognitive disputation involves confrontation, logical reasoning, persuasion, and use of syllogisms. Imaginable disputation, on the other hand, aims to employ rational emotive imagery where the patient may be prompted to imagine a situation in which he is likely to become upset and then substitute the following irrational process with a more adaptive one. The use of emotional control card ECC, a wallet-sized card, which would involve a list of inappropriate or self-destructive feelings and parallelly a list of appropriate and positive feelings. The patient in a conflict situation may refer to the card and alter the quality of his automatic feelings. In case of behavioral disputation, the client is encouraged to behave completely opposite to his normal behavior in the stressful situations. It also includes role-playing, review and progress of activities, completion of homework, etc. Confrontation and encouragement are also used as important techniques to help the client abandon irrational thought processes and acquire a more logical and adaptive attitude towards life. In this type of therapy, unlike psychoanalytic perspective, the role of counselor is very active and direct. They act as instructors, teachers in correcting the irrational cognitions of the client. The therapy is appreciated for its clear, effective and short-term approach. Also, its scope to be combined with behavioral techniques adds to the advantage. It is found to be efficacious with affective, anxiety and adjustment disorders, but its use is completely limited for intense disorders like schizophrenia. Overall, the therapy aims to use behavioral and emotional concepts to rationally cognitize the irrational thought process. Negative exaggeration. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Fig 4, Depicting Vicious Cycle of Irrational Thinking and Suggested Strategy. 4.3 Transactional Analysis. Another major cognitive theory is transactional analysis, TA, which was formulated by Eric Berne in the early 1960s. The theory rose to prominence through the publication of Best Two-Selling Booze, Games People Play 1964 by Eric Berne and I'm OK, You're OK 1967 by Thomas Harris. TA has been viewed to be an optimistic theory with its basic presumption lying in the fact that people can change without any unfortunate events of the past. With its anti-deterministic nature, the theory proposes that people have choices in their lives whereby they can choose an action and change the choice at a later date. TA is believed to be a rational approach in understanding behavior and is based on the positive view that all individuals can learn to trust, think and decide for their own selves. James and Johnward, 1970. Primary methods used by TA to predict human behaviors are 1. Structural analysis, aiming to understand what is happening within the individual. 2. Transactional analysis, describing what happens between two or more people. 3. Game analysis, understanding transactions between individuals that lead to bad feelings. 4. Script analysis, delving into the life plan that the individual is following. 4.3.1 STRUCTURAL analysis. In this kind of analysis, each person is believed to have three functional ego states: child, parent and adult. An ego state is defined by Berne as a consistent pattern of feeling and experience directly related to a corresponding consistent pattern of behavior. The first ego state to develop is the child, comprising of part of personality characterized with childlike behavior. Childlike behavior can be described as inquisitive, playful, affectionate, selfish and impulsive. The child ego state can be of two types: natural, free child and adaptive child. Natural child is that part which is spontaneous, impulsive, feeling-oriented, creative, intuitive and pleasure-loving. On the other hand, adaptive child is the compliant part of personality that conforms to the demands of the parental figures, which may be a result of negative life experiences or training. Parent ego state incorporates the attitude, behavior, moral values of parent figures. These messages are present throughout a person's life. A response to any thoughtful question that occurs in a span of 10 seconds is considered to come from parent ego state. Parent ego state can be classified as nurturing parent and critical parent. Nurturing parent is that part of the person that comforts, praises and eases others. On the other hand, critical parent is one that finds faults, disapproves, displays prejudices and biases. This type of parent is critical about the actions of others and prevents others from feeling good about themselves. The expression of these parent ego states may be inferred from the verbal and the nonverbal behavior. The adult ego state is the rational part of the person that tests reality and gathers data to think objectively. This ego state is not subdivided further and at times functions like a computer expressing itself through phrases like, I understand, and, I'm going to. A major focus of TA is to identify which ego state a person is using. Although TA does not support any ego state but just suggests the balance and flexibility in responses. A way to assess ego state is through the use of egogram, Doucet and Doucet, 1989. An egogram will remain fixed unless the individual changes and invests energy in another ego state. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.3.2 TRANSACTIONAL analysis, this way of understanding and predicting human behavior deals with interpersonal diagramming of relations in comparison to intrapersonal diagramming of structural analysis. Transactions may occur on one of three levels: complementary, crossed or ulterior. In a complementary transaction, both the people are operating from the same ego state such as child to child or adult to adult, or from complementary ego states such as parent to child or adult to parent. Fig 5, Depicting complementary transactions. In a cross transaction, an inappropriate ego state is activated, producing an unexpected response. Cross transactions are generally hurting when they occur and people tend to withdraw from each other. It occurs, for example, when one person operates from child ego state hoping from a response complementary ego state but rather receives a response from adult ego state. An example could be where an individual may ask the other person to carry a bag which must be weighing a ton, said in childish tone, and the response that he receives is that the bag cannot be that heavy and hence the person should carry it himself. Fig 6, Depicting cross transaction. Another form of transaction is ulterior transaction, in which two ego states operate simultaneously and one message disguises the other. Such transactions seem to be socially desirable and acceptable but actually carry hidden motives and agendas. An example of the same could be, do you want to come in and see my house, adult to adult ego state, but in reality it is, want to come in and have some fun together, child to child ego state. PAC PACACAC. PP. pp. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. They are generally used to hide their thoughts and feelings and represent negative emotions. 4.3.3 GAME analysis. Games according to Byrne are examples of ulterior transactions which appear complementary on surface but end in negative feelings. People play games to structure time, to predict others' behavior, to achieve recognition and prevent direct intimacy. They are generally used to hide their thoughts and feelings and represent negative emotions in a more socially desirable way. Games can be categorized as first degree, second degree, and third degree. First degree games are generally played with people who are willing to participate and have a safer end. On the other hand, second degree games involve a larger stake and may end in strong negative and harsh feelings. Lastly, third degree games generally involve a tissue damage and may cause permanent loss also. In each of the degrees, an individual operates from 3 levels of victim, rescuer, and persecutor with a switch-off point where the individual may switch among the roles. The list of games that people can play may be exhaustive but is not suggested to be a meaningful interaction in the long run. 4.3.4 SCRIPT analysis. Script according to Byrne was conceptualized as a life plan that every individual may develop by the age of 5. The writing of the script primarily depends on the interactions of the individual with the external environment. Positive or negative messages from the environment may determine the writing of a constructive or a destructive script. A life script of the individual also involves his ability to get strokes, which is the verbal or physical recognition of behavior. Such strokes result in collection of good or bad feelings called stamps. When an individual collects enough stamps, he cashes into behavior. According to Byrne, healthy people generally send and receive positive strokes. Life script of an individual can thus be positive or negative. Some examples of negative scripts are never scripts where an individual never gets to do what he wants to do because he has always been stopped from doing so for X. Swimming is dangerous, do not learn swimming, until scripts where a person has to wait until a certain time to achieve a reward for X. You cannot go to picnic till the time you finish your homework. Ta offers 4 okay positions determining the nature of their relationship. Each individual may operate from I'm okay, you're okay, a get on with position, I'm okay, you're not okay, a get away from position, I'm not okay, you're okay, a get nowhere with position, and I'm not okay and you're not okay, a get rid of position. Every individual operates from one of these positions at a point of time, but healthy functioning individuals learn to recognize the unhealthy positions and aim to alter them accordingly. The ideal life script is also based on I'm okay, you're okay position. Byrne also held that scripts once written can also be rewritten by the individual's own choice and efforts to change. You're okay. ACAC. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. I'm not okay. You're not okay. Fig 8, depicting ta okay positions. Besides these 4 major analysis methods, ta counselors also rely on other techniques such as a. Establishing a treatment contract with the client, b. Interrogating with the client's adult ego state unless an adult response is received, c. Identifying the ego state that initiated a transaction, d. Confronting the inconsistencies in the client's behavior, e. Explaining ta concepts from adult ego state and elicit a response from client's adult ego state, f. Illustrating problems in behavior with the use of humor at times, g. Interpreting behavior of the client to his child. And adult ego state, h. Crystallization of the adult to adult ego state transactions and autonomy of actions. The goal of TA is to make help client transform with the aim to achieve health and autonomy as well. Identification of the distort ego states and flexibility to use all ego states remains at the focus. Also, more reliance on the use of adult ego state is encouraged so as to be able to alter life scripts and adopt I'm okay and you're okay position in life. The role of counselor in TA is initially more of a teacher explaining the client the concepts of therapy and inviting new thought process in the client. Later, the counselor explores the area of changes in the client and helps him develop tools for such changes in the present. Corey, 1991. The use of assessment procedures in TA is not through formal psychological tests but rather through ergogram and other less formal methods. The basic emphasis is laid on understanding which ego state client is operating from and which types of transactions are made. The counselor helps the client to develop more awareness, become free of games and eliminate self-defeating life scripts. They are also encouraged to get free from negative influences of the past and more about one's own self. TA has been appreciated for being a short-term approach with easily understandable concepts. It also has the advantage to be combined with other action-oriented counseling therapies. The approach has benefited for being goal-directed and sharing the responsibility of change on the I'm okay. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Client. TA has been criticized for being less effective in sharing pure cognitive orientations. Where it's easily understandable concepts are an advantage, at the same time the approach is criticized for being too simplistic in nature. However, TA is found to be effective and presently it is divided into 3 main schools of treatment, the classical school, the cathexis school and the redecision school. All these schools use contracts as their primary method of intervention and have the achievement of autonomy as their final goal of treatment. 4.4 Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. Acceptance and Commitment ACT is the third wave behavioral therapy along with other therapies such as dialectical behavior therapy or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy reflecting a shift from the content of thought to the process of thinking. The theory was developed by Stephen G. Hayes 1980 and is based on functional contextualism which does not view clients as symptom-oriented but rather aims to delineate the functions and context of behavior. It is purely in opposition to mechanistic models which target at fixing of problems. Instead, ACT focuses on defining the functionality of behavior with the aim of creating more meaningful lives. The main aim of ACT is to explore fullness and vitality of clients' life and develop psychological flexibility. The therapy does not attempt to directly change the unwanted intrusive thoughts as conventional cognitive therapies but rather to develop a mindful relationship with the thoughts so as to stop a reaction to them. According to ACT, this psychological flexibility which can be understood as ability to be present, to open up and carry on activities which are important is gained through 6 processes. 1. Contact with present. To focus on here and now, resolve the past and live in present. 2. Self is context. Considering a transcendent of self is continuing and unchanging. To consider self in the background and understand actions as independent of self. 3. Diffusion. To reduce the tendency of uniting the negative thoughts, images, emotions and its influence on the subsequent behavior. 4. Acceptance. To be able to accept things as they are rather than catastrophizing on them. 5. Values. Defining what is important to own self and taking actions in accordance to it. 6. Committed action. Setting goals according to the values and carrying them out with sincerity and dedication. All above 6 processes do not operate in isolation and are interdependent. Mindfulness, acceptance and value clarification lie at the core of the therapy. Mindfulness can be developed. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Through coming in contact with the observing self rather than the thinking self. To be aware of the occurrence of phenomena rather than engaging into the process is the art of mindfulness as emphasized by ACT. Its techniques focus on experiencing and observing self firsthand without being contaminated with sensations, emotions and perceptions. On the other hand, acceptance is the ability to deal with things as they are instead of fighting or avoiding them. It is the ability to separate person from cognition. For instance, a person rather than saying, I am worthless should say, I have a thought that I am worthless. This differentiates the painful emotion and underlying biased cognition from the person itself. The ability to open up also falls complementary to mindfulness and acceptance. To be able to detach from thoughts and make space for the physical experience of the phenomena allows opening up to the new sense of being. Value clarification aims at identifying what matters to a person and taking actions as guided by the chosen values. These identified values generally act like a guide to intentional and effective behavior. To summarize, ACT views the causes of the problem originating with the acronym FEAR, i.e. fusion with thoughts, evaluation of experiences, avoidance of negative experience and reason giving for behavior. ACT also suggests the healthy alternative is lying in its acronym, which is to accept own reactions, choose valued direction and finally take action. 4.5 Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy (MBCT) is the meditation approach to the cognitive methodology as developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn 2001. It aims at improving well-being, mindfulness and spiritual experience in an individual. At the same time, it carries the potential to reduce stress and elaborate on coping strategies. Mindfulness can be understood as state of being rather than state of doing. It is the unique ability to pay attention to the observing self yet being non-judgmental about it. It is the full awareness of yourself without evaluating the quality of experience. It involves self-regulation of attention and the ability to direct the attention to other aspects such as deep breathing or feeling the nature. Mindfulness as a technique is generally applicable to deal with emotional problems such as stress, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, behavioral problems like substance addiction, pathological eating, etc., somatic problems such as hypochondriasis, myalgia, chronic pain and fatigue. It has been found to be very effective with depression. MBCT developed in response to relapse prevention of depression. Various studies reveal that people who were trained with MBCT have stayed free of depression and results have been equally good as being on antidepressants. In longitudinal studies, patients with MBCT were observed to experience less depression and a better quality of life. It worked upon the occurrence of the negative thoughts just as an experience and bringing back the attention to the present moment. Mindfulness when combined with meditation, stress reduction strategies has been found to be quite effective in treating depression. MBCT in comparison to CBT focuses on the presence of thought rather than the experience of thought. The former states, I'm having a thought, whereas the latter states, I am. It does not lay much emphasis on the judgment of thought as positive or negative but only its existence. It purports new ways of being in difficult circumstances than new ways of looking at challenging situations as in conventional CBT. MBCT focuses on awareness of thought without changing it, whereas CBT emphasizes on delineating dysfunctional thoughts and eliminating them from cognitive frame. CBT turns out to be thought content focused and MBCT on the hand remains. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Thought awareness focused. MBCT thus promotes ways of being in the world and CBT upholds way of thinking and challenging dysfunctional thoughts. Patients who have been trained in MBCT report positive effects such as being more patient and gentler to own self. Being more mindful every day and yet less critical. Also being able to deal with stress more effectively and feel more positive emotions. MBCT is a skillful technique and if applied in an appropriate way proves to be even more effective than antidepressants in the long term. With increasing life stresses, an individual should not only exercise daily but also practice MBCT so as to be able to prevent stress rather than dealing with crisis situations. All of the above mentioned cognitive therapies have cognition or the process of thinking at the epicenter but may vary in their techniques and methods to bring about a cognitive change. Each of the therapies have their unique way of conceptualizing and dealing with cognitive dysfunctions but all aim at improving the quality of life of the patient. The choice of therapy primarily depends upon the nature of the problem and receptivity of the patients or as in recent trend, eclectic approach can prove to be more effective. 5. Summary.